I will accept the divorce. Am I the only one who uttered these words with a slight smile on my lips? The look in Soashu's eyes was half relief, half regret. Is this a game or sincerity? So far I have been a good colleague and a perfect empress. We never fought, that is, until he brought her with him. He threw me away for his mistress, but until the last moment he wants to seem like a good man and emperor. And then there is my family and the great church. They approved of our marriage and insist now that I do not agree to leave the office of empress. He certainly does not like the idea of going through a tedious divorce process against these two groups. He is such a man and such an emperor. Your Majesty, this cannot be, shouted the Marquise of Ferring and tried to run up to me, but was detained by the Emperor's guards and prevented from taking even a step toward me. Marquise of Ferring and Countess Elise, my dear defenders, I am grateful to all of you. I looked at them trying to comfort them and turned to the minister. Empress Navia, do you really agree with this divorce document? Do you have no objection? The minister's voice is slightly angry. He too would like me to fight to the end and contest the reason for the divorce. Although there was no chance of winning in court, it would have caused a scandal for the emperor and his concubine as soon as people heard the news. This was what my friends, family, and minister really wanted. I shook my head. A divorce lawsuit might damage the Soviets' reputation, but my name would suffer, too. Not that it was a moral issue for me, but I couldn't use the situation to my advantage if things got complicated. The minister closed his eyes to the noise in the hall. And I want to ask for permission to remarry. When I finished speaking, the mood of those around me changed completely. There was silence in the room, and the shocked minister's eyes widened. Those present looked at each other, unsure of what they had heard. Soashu frowned and looked at me with confusion. The minister froze in a daze. Empress Navia, getting married? Instead of answering, I raised my hand and pointed to a certain spot. As if on cue, the man, whose face was hidden under the embroidered veil, burst out laughing pleasantly. Shall I come over? The silence was broken again by a whisper. A man walked across the hall and stood beside me. When he took off his veil, Soashu jumped to his feet. Navia. This man, that's the man I'm going to marry. The minister's eyes looked vacant. I turned to the man beside me with a smile. He was looking at me, and there seemed to be a question in his eyes. You were expecting that reaction, weren't you? I had a kind of good feeling about it. It wasn't the revenge I wanted, though. The Trabi family, from which I come, may well be considered the official purveyor of empresses. Among the imperial families and nobility, arranged marriages became commonplace. Marriage is for politics and romance is for lovers, and male and female nobility usually had a lover on the side. Ossus III, the previous emperor, chose me as a match for the crown prince, and the empress taught me etiquette and the workings of the imperial court from an early age. Fortunately, the crown prince Soashu and I got along quite well as good friends. We didn't see each other as lovers, but it was something else. It was the kind of relationship where even if we quarreled at home, we would go out in public with a smile. We worked well together and were very lucky. The nobles saw us as just a couple of kids, so we had time to discuss together the country we would build for the next generation. Growing up, Soashu inherited the imperial throne, and after his coronation, we still remained on good terms. For about 3 years or so. It was a bad day for planning New Year's Eve celebrations. After spending the day discussing with officials, I returned to my room to find my maid of honor distraught. What's the matter? I looked around anxiously, and one of my ladies answered with unaccustomed harshness in her voice. The emperor went hunting and brought some tramp to the palace. Then he summoned us and ordered us to clean up this filthy woman. All my ladies in waiting are ladies and wives from noble families, and so far, if they've ever helped me bathe, it's only me. For women who have never touched a dirty job, it must have been like thunder from out of the blue. It is rather strange. The emperor is well aware of the pride of the maidens, more than anyone else, but did he order them to wash the woman he picked up on the hunt? Which woman are we talking about? We don't know if she is a prisoner or a slave. They say her foot was trapped. My leg? I interrogated. Yes. The emperor found her trapped and rescued her. The ladies exchanged glances with each other. They seemed to want to say more, but they didn't want to talk about it next to me. Just tell me. After a little pressure, one of them reluctantly opened her mouth. Even when she was covered in mud, she seemed beautiful. I thought I had already imagined what she would look like before I washed her, but she was really stunning when I was done. Her beauty may well be compared to that of the Duchess of Tuana, the most beautiful woman in the world. And deciding that I felt uncomfortable, my maidens began their own tune, but of course there is no comparison with you, Your Majesty. My face is quite attractive, but both my status as a princess and my status as an empress were praised by everyone, so it is unknown how beautiful I really am. So I excluded myself from such rankings. The Duchess of Tunoi is known as the most beautiful woman in high society. She made her debut at 17, and was still a flawless butterfly at the age of 40. And now this enigmatic woman is being equated with the Duchess of Tuanar? And even my arrogant ladies-in-waiting think so. Perhaps the emperor really did save a beautiful lady in distress on the hunting grounds. My ladies-in-waiting have no reason to notice how beautiful she was. You can tell me anything. I can see that you all have something to share. I had to push them to talk again, and finally one of the maids got up the courage to tell me everything. The fact is, the emperor seems to have fallen in love with her. The maid of honor's face went very pale, as if she were frightened by the words she uttered. Emperor? Are you sure? After she was washed, we picked out clothes to fit her. His Majesty saw her and looked concerned and began to ask, "How did you get hurt? Why are you so thin? You look so poor." That sounds reasonable. Your Majesty, you are so young. You may not have had romantic feelings yet, but there are certain nuances and atmospheres here, Your Majesty. We're on your side so you don't have to hear it. And, if it turns out to be nothing, then everything will be fine. Among my ladies-in-waiting, the only one of my age is Lady Laura. All the others are older than I am, and their wisdom and knowledge are far greater than mine when it comes to human relationships. I get it. I mumbled with embarrassment. Even if what my ladies insinuate is true and that the emperor is interested in another woman, what should I do? Should I go to the emperor and ask if you are interested in your prisoner? Or expel her? Or put her to work in the imperial palace? I did not know how I should respond to this. Countess Elise approached me cautiously. How about trying your luck and saying you heard the emperor found the wounded woman? The ladies nodded in agreement and advised me to ask casually about it. Maybe to say that you heard it from one of the palace maids, just in case. I nodded and smiled, praying it wouldn't turn into a big problem. Okay. Thank you all. His Majesty the Emperor is a compassionate man, which must be why he brought her to the palace, out of pity. When should I ask the Emperor about the woman he found in the hunting grounds? After much deliberation, I decided to ask tomorrow at dinner. Although we were husband and wife, our rooms were divided into east and west. This arrangement was originally explained to show that the monarchy symbolically supported each side of the country. This meaning has long since disappeared, and it is now an ideal way for the emperor and empress to live without interfering with each other. Although Soashu still didn't have a concubine, we ate and slept separately because of our busy schedules and different lifestyles. But we still had dinner together twice a week, and one of those days was tomorrow. Yes. It's too unpleasant for me to go today and find out anything about the woman from the hunting grounds. I might as well wait a day. I haven't forgotten what my mother told me before the wedding: don't interfere in Soashu's affairs, even if he takes a concubine. Mom, are you sure this is the right thing to do? I asked her. Look at our history. Were there emperors without concubines? Even Ossus too, known as the Great General, had 20 of them. Don't waste your nerves on this, Navia. All you have to do for Soashu is to be young and beautiful, and healthy. Do you understand what I mean? You can find a man and make him your lover. Commoners might be surprised by such drama, but this is natural in a noble society where political marriages are the norm. Of course, the right of inheritance remains with the couple's children. Problems arose when one spouse sincerely loved his mate and would not allow other lovers. Almost all political conflicts arose in this way. Apparently this worried my mother a lot. And it was on her advice that I decided to pause and not run to owls today. I would ask him tomorrow. And even if he accepts this woman as his concubine, I just have to pretend to ignore it. I am not in love with him. I know that other people live just like me. And at the same time, when I think of my husband having another woman as his mistress, a feeling of loneliness arises in my heart. How strange. I put my hand on my chest. My heart beats neither slow nor fast. The next day the rumors about the hunted girl spread even faster. The only ones who spoke frankly about it to me were my ladies-in-waiting, but even as I passed by, I could hear the gossip behind my back. During dinner, the ladies waited patiently throughout the meal. I heard that the filthy tramp was an escaped slave. She must have gotten into the hunting grounds, fleeing for her life. The hunting grounds are connected to Viscount Rothschild's estate, so she must have escaped from there. If she is an escaped slave, she should be sent back immediately. I cannot believe that the emperor took pity on her and made us take care of this woman. Today the ladies dressed me more carefully and methodically than usual. A glittering dress, silver jewelry, simple pearl earrings, and a whole heap of praise and compliments were showered on me. They had always taken care of me, but today they seemed particularly adamant. No matter how beautiful a slave girl is, you are our empress. The emperor will have to open his eyes after he sees you. Their efforts seemed unnecessary, and I let the compliments slip through my ears. If Soashu had fallen in love with me for my beautiful clothes, shouldn't he have done it sooner? All that swirled around in my head were useless thoughts. Though I thought my lady's efforts were futile, I trusted them. After I was carefully dressed and combed, I went to the Oriental Palace where the emperor lived and sat down at the dinner table, which was too large for 2 people. We talked about political problems and preparations for the new year. I waited for Soashu to bring up the subject of the girl hunt himself, but no matter how much I waited, he didn't mention it. As he was cutting the steak, I finally made up my mind and brought it up myself. I heard that you found an escaped slave on the hunting grounds. Is this true? The knife slashed loudly across the plate and his hands froze. He lifted his head and stared at me. Who told you that? His tone was not a pleasant one. He actually seemed rather tense. Noticing the wrinkle between his eyebrows, I deliberately concealed my source of information. Everybody's talking. It's very hard not to hear. They must be your maid of honor. It doesn't matter who told me. Again, is it true? Soashu looked visibly uncomfortable as I repeated my question. Your Majesty, don't rush me. I don't know what you heard there. I found the woman and helped her. He called her a woman, not a runaway slave. I understand. So where is she now? Empress, please tell me. You and I have 2 dinners a week. We have a lot to talk about, don't we? I understand the coldness in his voice perfectly. Don't you dare interfere. What else is there to talk about? Your Majesty, I offered nothing out of the ordinary. As mistress of the palace, I only asked if you had brought a wounded woman. Because this has never happened before. Did I overdo it? I have the most casual tone and gentle smile. I speak casually, so as not to sound overbearing, as if we were discussing the upcoming holidays. But I could tell by Owl's expression that he was uncomfortable. He seemed to want to avoid the subject for as long as possible, and the atmosphere became increasingly unfriendly. Soashu looked at me suspiciously. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't interested. She accidentally fell into one of my traps, and I brought her here to heal her. She is not badly hurt, so I gave her a room and a maid to look after her. I get it. Don't worry. I won't go to your maid of honor again. Soashu went back to cutting the steak, his knife pounding on the plate like a woodpecker, echoing in the dining room. He usually had something to talk about, but today he was silent. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. What did His Majesty say? When I returned to the Western Palace, I found myself surrounded by a group of my ladies-in-waiting who were anxiously waiting for me in the parlor. He didn't say much. Countess Elise's raised eyebrow expressed doubt about my answer. She didn't seem to believe me. Then you wouldn't look so sullen. Well, what am I supposed to say? It's all right. Talk to us, Your Majesty. It will give us a chance to prepare. He said the woman had accidentally fallen into one of his traps. But he didn't mention that she was an escaped slave or anything. Come to think of it, I don't even know her name. He said he cared about her, and he didn't seem happy talking to me about it. Laura stomped her foot loudly. The other noble ladies looked at her reproachfully, but Laura was already angry and paid no attention to them. Your Majesty, do you know that this is how my father began his novel? Laura, shouted Countess Eliza sternly. But Laura was unstoppable. These are the first signs of adultery. Why doesn't he want to talk about it? The maidens berated Laura for her frankness, but they did not deny her words. Countess Eliza took charge and began to throw the ladies out. I looked depressed and she sat me down in front of the dressing table and began to brush my hair. The emperor loves to hunt. He brought her in, probably because he found it amusing a beautiful woman trapped. Countess. Yes, Your Majesty. Before, my mother told me, even if the emperor takes another woman as his mistress, I must not allow myself to be hurt. There are many cases like this, and I must not hope that it will be any different with me. Creases appeared on the Countess's forehead. Countess Eliza and her husband have a rare love marriage. For someone like her, my mother's advice must sound ridiculous. I continued, I didn't say it in front of the other ladies, but I'm a little prepared. Even if the emperor does take a slave girl as his concubine. Your Majesty, but when he doesn't talk to me, I feel a little depressed. Countess Elise put the comb on the dresser. I looked at her and asked honestly, even if he has 10 or 100 concubines, they are still concubines, and I am the empress. He and I have never loved each other to the point of dying without each other, so theoretically we should be fine. But why do I feel so empty? Countess Eliza hugged me, stayed for a while, and then stepped back. Even though you have a political marriage, you were together from childhood until marriage. No wonder you're upset. I would feel the same way if my child brought someone else in as his adoptive parent. I would be upset if my parents took another child and supported him because he was prettier. And I would be upset if my best friend invited someone else and was more friendly with them than with me. These are natural emotions. Then would the emperor feel the same way if there was another man beside me? Countess Eliza took a comb and began to brush my hair again, and I took her silence as a no. Finally she spoke. To be honest, I don't know, Your Majesty. The stronger the love, the harder it is to cope with it. It turns out I have no other choice but to deal with my broken heart on my own. I forced myself to smile. I get it. I'm sure I'll feel better soon. She and I won't have to meet, yes. Even if a slave becomes a concubine, she still cannot enter secular society. Slavery did not mean that you could not change your status. After all, there were many innocents who became slaves because of the collective punishment of their family members. Each year the country returned a certain number of slaves to commoner status, but it never freed runaway slaves. Slavery merely meant that a person was sentenced to life imprisonment for a crime he had committed. But a runaway slave who did not work off his crime was equated with an escaped prisoner. Escape was added to the previous crime, and a runaway slave was considered scum even among slaves. No matter how much Soish likes this woman, she has no opportunity to make her debut into high society, and I will not meet her. I nodded my head and pulled myself together. Countess Eliza is right. It was only natural that I felt devastated when the man who had been my husband for a long time suddenly became interested in another woman. But I can't be that emotional on New Year's Eve. It doesn't matter that he has another woman, he can't give up on me. After all, there is only one empress in this empire. Does the emperor visit the slave girl every day? I heard that he even brings her food himself. He acts so calm. Courageous. He even called a forensic doctor to treat her leg. There were whispered voices in the bushes. In the gardens at the imperial palace, the flower walls were above my head, but I still keep hearing rumors. I designed this garden myself, and I deliberately placed a rocking chair in the shape of a nest in a place few people know about. It is my secret place. I don't bring my maid of honor here, so people talk out loud without noticing me. It's been about a week. I closed the book and put it in my lap. As Soish's interest in the slave girl grew, so did the gossip. All eyes were on the woman who had succeeded in capturing the emperor's interest. Wasn't it lucky that she and I never ran into each other like that? At the next dinner, I didn't ask Al about her. I acted as if nothing had happened and brought up preparations for the New Year's holidays. I decided that I would compromise for now. Ignorance. I'll pretend I don't know anything. But coincidences came out of nowhere and stood in front of me. That day, the officials and I gathered in the conference room to discuss preparations for the coming new year. After a long negotiation, I had a sore throat and drank a glass of warm water and strolled through the central palace garden to relax. Artini, the deputy head of the knights, accompanied me along with my ladies-in-waiting. We were discussing with him who else to recommend for the ceremony, and I heard a whisper from somewhere, "Is that her?" I looked around and saw a woman sitting in a wheelchair, accompanied by two maids. Our eyes met, and the woman struggled to get up. The maids tried to stop her, but when they saw my gaze, they retreated. The woman held onto the handles of her wheelchair uncertainly, and bowed to greet me. I'm not sure who she is. Of course I thought she might be that slave girl, but we were near the central palace, and that's no place for a mistress to walk. Perhaps she holds some position in the palace. Anyway, even with her sore feet she greeted me, so I nodded in favor. I turned around to continue walking, and I heard her behind me. "Hi. Hello? Is she talking to me?" It was the first time I'd heard anyone address me like that since I was an empress. I looked around excitedly. The woman in the wheelchair was rolling toward me. The confused maids shouted, "Rashter, don't," but she completely ignored them. Does she have something to do with me? If she does, she must know that I am the empress. And yet she said, "Hello," to me. I looked at her with bewilderment, and a woman named Rashter drove closer and greeted me again. "I am Rashter. What am I supposed to do?" "Yes, Rashter." She smiled, as if pleased that I called her by her name. Did she really want me to call her that? I was curious, but not curious enough to ask why. Audience time was over, my brain completely shut down, listening to strangers' stories for 3 hours. If it had been an emergency, she would have asked for my help as soon as she saw me. But she was still smiling cheerfully and didn't seem to need my attention. I turned around again, figuring I wouldn't see anything else here. But just as I was about to leave, she clutched at the skirt of my dress. The maidens beside me became alarmed and threw her arms away, as if she were a monkey from the zoo. How rude. Don't you know who this lady is? Rashtar shuddered with surprise and hesitated. I'm sorry, I should have called you by your name, but I don't know your name. Does she really not know that I am the Empress? Didn't I hear her maid whisper, is that her? Laura looked at Rashtar and yelled at her, this is Her Majesty the Empress. Be careful what you do. Rashtar's eyes widened. What? I know the Empress. Does she know the Empress? I frowned at her strange words, and she looked me in the eye and said quietly, I'm Rashtar. Who is this Rashtar? My maidens and I were terribly confused. Did we know each other well enough to address each other by name? I tried to remember women her age who had visited our country with foreign dignitaries. I did not meet every guest. There were guests whom I met personally, guests who were welcomed by the foreign minister, guests who met directly with Soashu. She never met me. Perhaps she met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. No, that cannot be. If she were from a great noble family, my ladies-in-waiting would know of her, even though I do not know her. Do you know me? I decided to be frank with her, and she looked surprised. You don't know me. I'm not sure who you are. Rashtar whispered to the maid, what should I do? I heard her, of course. But I'm tired. I don't even know who she is. I was about to ignore her and leave, but Rashtar screamed again. I live in the Eastern Palace by the grace of His Majesty the Emperor. Grace to the Soviets. Oriental Palace. A leg injury. A woman. Slave girl? Then why is she near the Central Palace? Before I could ask, Rashtar's face turned pale. Your Majesty, forgive my rudeness. Miss Rashtar is not a slave. Rashtar's maid came up to correct me. Not a slave? But my ladies-in-waiting told me she was an escaped slave. If it had been a false rumor, they would have informed me that it was not a credible story, but there was no such statement. The slave girl was prettier than I expected. And I wasn't expecting to meet her like that at all. I didn't care for the gossip, but she is as beautiful as the rumors say. Her beauty is not as graceful as that of the famous Duchess Tuana. Rashtar's image was soft and somehow ethereal. Her large dark eyes aroused protective instincts, and the color of her hair of a wondrous light silver hue gave her pure and innocent charm even more mystery. Wait a minute. My maidens were tidying her up, so why didn't anyone recognize her? I looked around. Some of the ladies were not with me today. Unfortunately, the missing ladies were the ones who had seen Rashtar. Oh, now I know who you are. I nodded, and Rashtar smiled. Rashtar, Emperor Soashu's new love. Thank God. In fact, I was wondering when we would meet. Would you meet me? Why? I asked the Emperor, but he kept telling me I didn't have to worry, but I thought we should do it anyway. Meet each other. Why? What should I call you, Your Majesty? Just call it, Your Majesty. Huh, she was surprised. She must have been expecting something else. You should call me what everyone else calls me. I don't know why I'm still pretty friendly with this girl. Rashtar seemed to be feeling tired. She hummed with the exertion of moving her wheelchair. Sensing that my mood was finally ruined, my ladies grasped the handles of the wheelchair and pulled her back slightly. Stay away. Who are you to act so friendly to Her Majesty? Laura's hands trembled with anger as she pulled the woman back. Dirty? What do you mean by dirty? Soashu appeared, his voice like shards of ice. The Emperor witnessed my maid of honor Laura insulting his beloved. It was quite a scene. Laura and the other maidens picked up their skirts and bowed to him, but he only looked at them angrily. I had already met Soashu several times today and was just observing instead of greeting him. Soashu looked at Laura, then turned to Rashtar. It's perfect. Soashu sighed. Rashtar's eyes were wet, perhaps from surprise. The way she looked at him was pathetic, making her look like a frightened animal. Don't cry. Despite his attempt to reassure her, tears rolled down Rashtar's face. I said don't cry. Despite the gruff tone in his voice, Rashtar continued to cry. She seemed unafraid of his notoriously cold attitude. I stared at her in silence. To my surprise, Soashu pulled out a handkerchief with gold embroidery and held it out to her. Her tears did not stop. Even after he offered her the handkerchief, he wiped her face himself with a sigh. You're pathetic. There was anxiety in his voice, and my heart ached again. No, it's natural. Yes, it's natural. I reminded myself of Countess Eliza's words and turned to the ladies, ordering them to follow me. Let's go. I'm tired. I can't stop owls from having a concubine, but I don't have to look at her. The ladies followed me. Wait. Before I could take a single step, Soashu stopped us. At first I was constantly stopped by Rashtar, but now him. So Vushu took a closer look and found Laura and pointed her out. Empress. This maid of honor will remain. Why? I said leave her alone. She is my maid of honor. You must tell me. Laura turned pale. I, too, had an ominous feeling. He wants to punish Laura for what she said to Rashtar, doesn't he? But even if Laura's behavior is not exemplary, she is still the Empress's maid of honor. Rashtar, on the other hand, is not even a concubine yet, and yet she is not one of the lower nobility. In addition, she is very likely an escaped slave. So if Soashu is going to punish Laura, it would shame her in high society. So would I, the Empress. She is a maid of honor to the Empress, but she is also my subject. How dare she say that? All right. Then I'll scold her. Do you think that a scolding will fix the one who calls the other person dirty? Of course not. So Vushu barked an order to the nearest guard, pointing his chin at Laura. Lock her up for 3 days on bread and water. Laura's face turned white, and my maidens murmured, "This is too much, Your Majesty." I stepped forward, blocking Laura, and Soashu directed his icy gaze at me. She called a woman in a wheelchair who can't even walk normally dirty. Don't you think that's too much? You were just watching. I guess you didn't think it was too much. My ladies only stopped her because she clung to my dress. The expression on Soashu's face became even uglier. You were leaving her. Your Majesty. What's wrong with grabbing a dress? Is the Empress's dress more noble than a human hand? All right. Then I'll have your servant pull the hem of your cloak. Even if your cloak is not as noble as a human hand, is that still acceptable? Soashu raised an eyebrow and smirked. Your words make no sense. Do you really think this is the same situation? And how is that different? It's different. Then explain the difference. Rashtar is not a servant. I was about to wonder if I should change my example to what he would do if my supposed lover started grabbing his clothes. But, lock up the Empress maid of honor for 5 days. Before I could say anything, Soashu toughened Laura's punishment. The more I confronted him, the more cruel he became. I looked at Rashtar, sitting behind Soashu, her eyes wide open, staring at him with rapt attention, as if he were a hero. The words I was about to say stung the tip of my tongue, but even I, the Empress, cannot override the Emperor's orders. Yes, I can schedule a trial to challenge Laura's punishment, but by the time the trial begins, she will have been released. I accept the punishment, Your Majesty. While I agonized over my defeat, Laura stepped forward. My face turned red with shame and anger. Take me away. And as if nothing had happened, instead of explaining what his beloved was doing at the central palace, Soashu began to praise me for my hard work. Soashu and I weren't passionate lovers, but we were good friends. And now we're not friends anymore. I gritted my teeth and looked away. Now I knew exactly why my mother had advised me not to get involved with concubines. The imperial palace was buzzing with gossip over Laura's imprisonment. The gossip was that the emperor's punishment of the empress's maid of honor was a direct expression of his love for Rashtar. In this first unofficial contest, the victory was hers. I did not hear it myself, but my maidens were furious in telling me about it as soon as I returned to I should have been there. The maid of honor, who was tidying up Rashtar, exclaimed. If she had been there, she would have kept me away from the slave girl. The emperor must really love her. I used to admire him, but he didn't even hear what the empress said. Despite my anger, my ladies were concerned about the future. It has only been a few days since the emperor brought her in. I am worried. And there was nothing I could do in that situation. When we met at the central palace, Soashu and I acted as if nothing had happened. I concentrated on my work, trying to forget what had happened that day. When I was alone, I felt a nagging pain in my heart, but it got smaller when I was busy. 5 days later, when Laura's confinement was over, I personally came to the tower to pick her up. I asked my ladies-in-waiting to help her tidy up by giving up her bath and ordered her favorite dishes and cake to be prepared. In the midst of our troubles, Secretary Soashu came to me with a message. His Majesty the Emperor wants to see you. Me? Yes. What could it be? I nodded and turned to Countess Elise. When Laura has eaten, tell her I'm giving her a few days off before she goes back to her duties. Yes, Your Majesty. I turned to the secretary, and he quickly led the way. The atmosphere had changed slightly, though the palace was still surrounded by the same wall, perhaps because it was decorated differently. I was worried that I might run into Rashtar again, but she was nowhere to be seen. The emperor was waiting for me sitting at the table. You wanted to see me? So Vushu stared at me in silence. The words he wanted to say to me seemed to flicker in his eyes. His Imperial Majesty the Council. What can I do for you? I spoke first. Shu hesitated and stubbornly pursed his lips. Your maid of honor, the one who was imprisoned, Laura. Daughter of the Marquise of Taratal. I heard you met her on the doorstep of the prison. She is my maid of honor. And she suffered for 5 days. And you had to do that? Asked a disgruntled Shu. Are you asking me if I should take care of the girl who was punished? I can clearly hear the sneer in my voice. You know what I'm trying to say. In other words, you yourself brought back the maid of honor who offended me. Didn't you? Partly. I suspected that Shu might be offended, but I thought he'd cooled off after 5 days. I hoped that things would settle down and I could still explain to him that the punishment didn't fit the crime, if you could call it that. Apparently not. I suspected that you might not be happy. But now you care about her. If you were thinking of me, you would have sent her away. What will they say of the emperor if the empress cares for a man he has punished? It is wrong to send someone away after they have already received their punishment. Besides, she did nothing wrong. Calling people dirty is not a bad thing. She was just trying to stop someone from pulling my clothes. Punishment is already too much. The more I talk, the angrier he looks. So you're going to keep this maid of honor? But that's entirely up to me. I decide who my maid of honor is. Even if Laura wants to resign, I want to keep her by my side for a while. The punishment for a runaway slave is enough to make her an outcast in high society. If I let her go, she will lose her protection, not to mention Shu. As empress, I can use my name to protect her. Shu turned away with a sigh. I'm tired of arguing with you. Can't you just obey my request? The empress is not obliged to obey the emperor's will. Keep it up, you can't even compare. Compare? I'm sorry, with who? He was looking right at me. I can see that you are tired. Please go get some rest. Go back and take care of your bad mare. After Empress Navia left, Shu sighed and rang the little bell. The door opened, but it was not the servant who entered the room. Since when do you work? Seeing Shu's puzzled expression, Rashtar smiled shyly. I feel like a burden if I don't do anything. So are you going to work now? Rashtar happily fluttered her arms, and Shu smiled. You can't even walk on your own. Serving the emperor was considered a great honor among the nobility and was a position coveted even by those without a title. But Rashtar wanted to work for the emperor because she felt a burden. She had no idea that the nobles were willing to strangle each other over the place. What an unusual person. Al was amused by her strangeness. Shu had only 2 significant women in his life. One was his mother, the great empress, and the other was Navia, the current empress. He knew of the empress' rigorous education and had even studied with Navia, but he did not think that the awkward Rashtar would prove so incredible, no matter what she did. Come here and let's get something to eat. So Vushu called again, and the servant entered, waiting impatiently at the door. Pumpkin pie. Very nice. And bring some wine. A light one. The servant left to carry out the order, and Rashtar clapped her hands together. Pumpkin pie. Do you like the food that much? Not just any food. How many people in their lives have never even tasted a piece of pumpkin pie? She smiled innocently, resembling a child, and Shu realized that he couldn't take his eyes off her. The empress doesn't even respond to jewelry, no matter how much it costs. And you're still happy with the little things. Doesn't she love jewelry? She loves. But she doesn't have many emotional ups and downs. She expresses herself only in small portions. Rashtar frowned and sighed. She grew up in a beautiful environment and does not know the harsh world. Of course she takes the jewels for granted. It's not that the empress is wrong, it's just that she has too much jewelry. Even if you gave her a large jewel, it wouldn't surprise her, that's for sure. My goodness. My prey is smarter than I thought. Rashtar didn't know if he was laughing at her or not. She blushed and pouted her lips. You always call me prey. Because you are the victim I have caught in my trap. So, Your Majesty. Rashtar laughed at his joke, then decided to bring up an important subject for her again. You said you would make me your concubine, yes. The empress doesn't seem to know it yet. Shu nodded and smiled encouragingly. There's no rush, so let's take it slow. Your legs haven't fully recovered yet. I'm not in a hurry, but it was difficult for me when I met the empress. I didn't know how to introduce myself. What if it happened again? The emperor is going to take this woman as his concubine. It was a typical morning. It was neither cloudy nor rainy, warm nor cold. Today was the same as yesterday or the day before. Unusual news came out of nowhere on this most ordinary day. It turns out that while the empress is busy preparing for the New Year celebrations, the emperor takes a concubine. I think it's too much. He should have at least waited until after the New Year's festivities. My ladies complained grimly to each other. I looked at myself in the mirror in silence. I was ready for Soashu to make her his concubine, but I didn't know it would happen so soon. Judging by the timing, the ceremony might officially take place just before New Year's Eve. Horror, a sigh escaped from the depths of my soul. I felt nauseous at the thought of everyone coming to my house on New Year's Day and everyone wanting to talk to me about it. And even if they don't say it to my face, I will still hear their whispers behind my back. I can't ignore the fact that the emperor is taking a concubine without considering how much I like his idea. When is the ceremony? I couldn't take it anymore. My maidens looked at each other, and finally Countess Elise answered me. Rumor has it that he wants to have the ceremony as soon as possible. He wants it done before the new year. At about noon the secretary came to me again with a message. Naturally it was about the concubine, and the officials were quiet, trying to catch a new cause for gossip. The emperor wants to keep it simple, since there are other major events planned and time is limited. I was surprised. The concubines of the emperor were not recognized as members of the imperial family, and their children were not called princes or princesses. The best that could happen to such children was an opportunity to earn a favor or receive the title of duke, with no claim to succession. In spite of this, a concubine could give birth to the emperor's child, and it was customary to hold a banquet. This, of course, was not considered a wedding ceremony. The concubine would be the center of attention during the banquet, and at the end a contract would be signed and notarized. Does the emperor want to hold a simple banquet or skip it altogether? I am perplexed, as it were, but it is an important event for a woman. It is impossible to invite a large number of guests in such a short time, so we will miss the banquet. Is there anything I need to prepare if there is no banquet? No. His Majesty said you need not worry about it. Well, as far as I know, skipping the banquet wasn't really unusual. You could decorate a hall in the palace and have a small dinner party in honor of the concubine by inviting the emperor's closest friends, who would then be present at the signing of the documents. But don't I really have to take care of it? Is it out of pride of the Soviets or? Tell him I got his message. Well, there's no harm in that for me. The secretary bowed and left. The officials stared at me, but when I looked up, they hastily lowered their heads and pretended to be absorbed in working papers. Don't you dare tremble in front of them. They would start whispering if I showed any sign of pain. Even if the concubine had taken part of my life away from me, I didn't want them to think it was over just because my husband had fallen in love with another woman. Putting on an indifferent expression, I reviewed the celebration plan again and advised necessary changes. Her Imperial Majesty Navia ****, the Emperor will sign first. Then you sign over the thin black line under his name. Baron Lunt, one of the Emperor's secretaries, was put in charge of Rashter's training. When the Baron finished his explanation of the main points of the documents, Rashter's eyes widened and she shrieked softly. It was not a sound a noblewoman could make. Baron Lunt stared at her in amazement, and tears flowed from Rashter's eyes. I know what you mean, but Rashter doesn't have a signature. You can make it up, there's still time. Rashter blushed at this careless answer. Can't you write? Baron Lunt finally understood why Rashter resisted. When Baron Lunt was sent to see Rashter, the Emperor told him that she was a commoner. The Baron assumed that she had only a basic education. But in this case, perhaps the rumors are true, this beautiful prey whom the Emperor preferred to the Empress is indeed a runaway slave. After all, the country spent a great deal on schools for commoners in the hope of finding new talent among them, but it did not invest in the education of slaves. I don't suppose you do. He wanted to ask if she was a slave, but he just smiled, pretending not to be aware of the rumors, and put a blank piece of paper in front of her. Of course he couldn't teach her to write in a few days, but he could at least teach her how to write her name. If you don't know how to spell your name, I will write some versions for you that read Rashter, and you can choose the one you like and memorize it. Fortunately, Rashter quickly mastered her signature. It might have been a difficult task for a former slave, so Baron Lunt was pleasantly surprised. Am I making it? You are doing a wonderful job. After complimenting her and getting a smile in return, Baron Lunt continued to explain about the upcoming signing ceremony. There will be a big banquet and the nobles will be invited to it. Miss Rashter can invite as many friends as she wants. Wow. When the Chancellor comes up to you and unfolds government documents in front of you, you sign them. Documents, at the Chancellor's, they will be safe. Rashter stomped her foot in delight and shrieked softly. Baron Lunt watched her for a while, and then added, it's not necessary, but... Rashter's wide-open eyes stared at the Baron with admiration. Sometimes the Empress sends a gift to the Emperor's concubine when she signs a contract. A gift? The empress is the mistress of the palace. There was expectation in Rashtar's eyes. From the mistress' point of view, the concubine is the one who will live with them in the future. This means that the concubine will not only receive the emperor's respect and recognition, but also the empress's if the empress gives her a gift. If there are several concubines, those who receive a gift from the empress are considered the chief concubines. So Rashtar will receive a gift from the empress. Rashtar suddenly looked insecure. I'm not sending her a present. My maidens exchanged relieved glances among themselves. Thank God. I was so worried that Her Majesty might send a gift. There are many reasons not to send a gift. After the secretary left Soashu, I started looking for any precedents just in case. Even if there was a banquet, it would not be necessary to give a gift to a concubine. If there were several concubines, one could refuse gifts to prevent them from gaining influence over the empress's closest relatives. But the situation with Rashtar was none of them. In any case, I had no desire to send her a present, so when Soashu sent a secretary and told me not to worry about it, I decided really not to bother. Why couldn't I just say, please take care of my husband? Don't worry. I'm not sure if there's a reason I'm obligated to send a gift, but I won't. Laura would be happy to have her here. I was thinking of leaving the palace today, so I will tell Laura about it. Your Majesty. How's Laura? When I saw her the other day, she was still talking angrily about that woman. Marquise Taratal is also furious and tells this story every time she has a tea party. I think it's better if they stay on my side. Soashu and his assistants will take good care of Rasht, so I don't think people close to me will have to support her. By the way, Your Majesty, may I ask you something? About what? I was distracted from my thoughts. There is a rumor that the Prince of the Western Kingdom is coming to visit us for the new year. Is this true? The ladies stopped talking and stared at me. I nodded, and my ladies shrieked softly, covering their faces with their fans. I strained my lips to keep from laughing. My lovely maidens had every reason to look forward to his appearance. The Prince of the West is the only younger brother of the king that has been the subject of many rumors. He's so handsome, isn't he? They say that when you meet him with your eyes you can lose your tongue. And I've heard he's pretty stubborn. I wonder if his older brother the king gave up trying to marry him. Are the rumors about seedless watermelons true? I don't know. But it's a little suspicious that the king has no children, and neither does the prince. And they are notorious womanizers. I listened carefully to the quiet whispers of my chatterers. The Western Kingdom was famous for its great military might. They were almost equal in strength to our Eastern Empire. As for wealth, from that point of view, they were the richest in the world. And the Prince of the West is first in line for the throne and the source of various gossip. I put all thoughts of Soish and his concubine aside and immersed myself in the sweet chatter of my ladies. Your Majesty, His Highness Liltiang has sent you a gift of foreign silk. Today my maidens finished the day's preparations for me earlier than usual, so I stayed late to have coffee with them. Meanwhile, Prince Liltiang sent a servant with a gift. I tore my gaze away from my coffee cup and examined the object in the servant's outstretched hands. It was a gorgeous blue silk cloth that shone like fish scales. I sighed and set the coffee down. The silk looked nice and expensive, but I had a hard time accepting it, given the sender's intentions. Prince Liltiang is Soashu's uncle and is 2 years older than his nephew. Although he did not want to become emperor, the prince regularly tried to bribe me and ask me for favors since I became empress. So, if I accepted the gift, he would surely be subject to difficult demands. Thank you, but tell him I can't accept the gift because it might cause a misunderstanding. As it had happened many times before, the servant smiled awkwardly, as if he, too, expected rejection. After muttering a respectful yes, he retreated. The gentleman was not yet tired. When the door closed behind him, Countess Eliza spoke her mind, and my ladies burst into laughter. The atmosphere became peaceful again. Quite unexpectedly, there was a second visitor. I went to the central palace after breakfast every morning, so I didn't get many visitors at such early hours. But 2 people in one morning. I agreed to receive him. I was curious. Fortunately, the second visitor turned out not to be a servant of a nobleman offering a bribe, but an official coordinating the agenda. It wasn't difficult, we exchanged a few words, and he left. But to my surprise, there was a third visitor. This time it was Rashtar, whom I thought I would rarely meet face to face. Rashtar? Really? I looked back at the guard in surprise. He bowed his head and answered, yes, with disdain. Countess Eliza intervened again. Why did she dare come here? The guard didn't know, he just stood at the door and announced the arrival of visitors. But he seemed to feel responsible for her arrival, as he told me the news with a confused expression on his face. Countess Eliza turned to me anxiously. Will you receive her, Your Majesty? Well, honestly, I didn't want to see her at all. Why should I see someone who would only hurt my feelings? Maybe someday I could laugh and talk with Soashu, even with a crowd of beautiful concubines beside him. But not now. It's still hard for me to relate easily to Soashu's mistress. And yet, let her in. Your Majesty! Countess Eliza cried out in surprise. I picked up my half-full cup of coffee. I didn't want to see her, but Rashtar was just Soashu's concubine and first love. That's love, isn't it? The first woman he ever fell in love with. Soashu had been cold to me since she came along, and I didn't want to fight with him again. Even if I could not love him passionately, I did not want to be hated by the Emperor. So I could only endure her visit. This is our second meeting, Your Majesty. I am Rashtar. I didn't know if she was pretending not to know or care about the incident with Laura. Rashtar greeted me with a bright smile as soon as she walked in. Countess Eliza did not hide her displeasure and sat in dead silence while I kneaded my facial muscles into something as dispassionate as possible. Fortunately, I have great practice in hiding my emotions in situations that were not ideal. Unlike the first meeting, now I'm sure you're his concubine. Congratulations. Thank you, answered a radiant Rashtar. Her Majesty Navia and the first concubine of Emperor Rasht. I automatically greeted her, but what should I say now? I thought for a moment and decided to get right to the point. What brings you here? What brings me here? She repeated the question. Well, how should I react? You and I are like sisters now, Your Majesty. Family. Countess Eliza was caught off guard and choked on her cold coffee. She put her hand to her mouth, coughed, and stared at Rashtar. I'm confused, too. What did I just hear? Sister? Family? Family? I must have misunderstood something, yes. Because we have the same husband. My calm expression almost shattered. I fought with myself to suppress a twitching nerve. A concubine's contract is literally a contract, and they are not recognized as part of the imperial family. A concubine could receive a very decent amount of cash and expensive gifts during her contract, but if her contract was not renewed, she would have to leave the imperial palace. Children born to concubines were not considered princes or princesses, even if their father was an emperor. And yet this girl only considers us family because we now have one husband for two. There were so many errors in that statement that I didn't even know where to begin. When I calmed my thoughts, Rashtar put both hands together. May I call you sister? The cold air chilled me. I pursed my lips. This was the limit of my tolerance. No. The expression on Rashtar's face became unsightly. She blinked and looked at me as if startled. It was as if she had not expected such an answer. Her reaction was even more surprising to me. She practically said, "Let's be sisters. I took away your husband, but we'll be friends." Did she really expect me to agree? Is it because you don't like Rashtar? Her big, doe-like eyes became wet with tears. It's not that I hate you. Of course I hated her. You may have become the emperor's concubine, but you are not my sister. I tried to explain this difficult truth to her with a smile, but Rashtar only cried more. She must have thought I was making fun of her. The smile didn't work, so I put it away and decided to end our meeting there. Goodbye. After Rashtar left, everyone in the room looked at each other in shock. Really, I really don't know what to say about her. Countess Eliza is stunned. So are the other ladies in waiting. Most of them had never seen the emperor's concubines before, let alone visited the empress. Frowning, I turned to the oldest maid of honor. Is that what a concubine looks like? Although I had lived in the imperial palace since I was young, I had never met the previous emperor's concubines while I was studying. I was not old enough to make my social debut then, so I never had the opportunity to see even one of them. Concubines rarely meet the empress, said the old maid of honor after thinking for a while and then added cautiously. It would only hurt each other's feelings. Usually concubines do not want the empress to dislike them. Then why is it wrong with me? Sooner or later she would need a maid of honor. Countess Eliza sighed. The empress says she's a commoner, but I'm afraid she doesn't look like one at all. I wonder if any young girl would want to be a concubine's maid of honor. Will there be a banquet? Rashtar asked Soashu how big the banquet would be and if she could invite her friends to it. But she was not prepared for such a blow. But the Baron said there was going to be a big party. Didn't I tell you that New Year's Eve was coming up? I didn't want to rush into signing the contract, but you were the one who wanted the ceremony to take place as soon as possible. Despite her explanations, Rashtar looked at the Emperor in confusion. Soashu realized that he would overestimate her level of common sense. She looked smarter than she seemed, but he had forgotten that she knew nothing of nobles. That's my mistake. What do you mean by that? Still didn't understand the distraught Rashtar. It's hard to have a big banquet. Besides, there are other things that need my attention. The celebrations are just around the corner and it's too rude to have one banquet after another. Is there another banquet on the same day as the Rashtar signing ceremony? No. But the new year is coming up, and there are all kinds of events planned. Rashtar was saddened. Her dreams of receiving congratulations at a lavish grand banquet in her honor had turned to dust. She wanted so much to be surrounded by nobility, so she persuaded the Sovietcher to hold the ceremony as soon as possible. She understood that the emperor would be annoyed if she showed displeasure, so Rashtar showed no sign of her unhappiness and remained silent. But her disappointment only increased on the day of the ceremony. Even if there was not a grand banquet, she still expected something like this. When that did not happen either, she hoped that the emperor would apologize and promise gifts. There were no words of congratulations and no gift from the empress. Rashtar was saddened when Baron Lant told her that the palaces were under the empress's rule. Rashtar practiced her signature diligently, but after signing the document she felt devastated. When she finished, the chancellor left immediately, saying he had work to do. There was no applause, no congratulations, no sense of ecstasy, as if she had everything in the world. So Ashu also left with, "There's work I have to finish and, I'll see you later." When Rashtar returned to her room, she covered her face with her hands. Why is this so? Rashtar's maids surrounded her and asked her what had happened. The boil that had been building up in her heart finally burst. The empress hates me, or we would not have missed the banquet and presents. If she does not give me a gift, will she not show her true face? Don't cry, Rashtar. Why are you crying on such a good day? Don't worry, you rarely see her anyway. In spite of his entreaties, Rashtar's pain had not disappeared. So when Soashu hurried to her after finishing his work, he noticed that she was in a gloomy mood. Why does my prey look so sad on this momentous day? What do you mean by significant day? No one congratulated me, no one congratulated you. The chancellor congratulated you and the servants. But Rashtar wanted the congratulations of the nobles, not the servants. She wanted to be recognized by those who lifted their chins high, as if they were the best in the world. The empress hates Rashtar. Rashtar's face grew even darker as she began to list her grievances against the empress, and Soashu was forced to confess. The empress did not prepare a banquet and a gift, not because she hates you. I told her not to do it because it was not the right time. Rashtar nodded, but it was clear that she did not believe him. In such an atmosphere, Soashu could not relax and have fun with his concubine. The next day Soashu gave the secretary a gift, which he in turn gave to Rashtar on behalf of the empress. When I visited her, she told me that I was a concubine, but not her sister. Must it be so, Baron Lunt? Or does the empress hate me? After the signing ceremony was completed, it was Baron Lant who was appointed to manage most of Rashtar's affairs. He visited her today for no particular purpose, and was unpleasantly surprised to hear this unexpected story. Did you visit the empress? Yes, she sent a present to Rashtar. I thought I should go and greet her if she sent a gift. Baron Lunt groaned and pinched himself. Rashtar tilted her head. What is it? Did Rashtar do something wrong? Worse than that, the Baron was silent, not knowing how to explain such trivial things to her. Rashtar stared at him expectantly with her huge eyes. The positions of Miss Rashtar and the Empress are exactly the opposite of each other. Why? They are both wives of the same husband. Is that what Rashtar told the Empress? Baron Lunt felt dizzy for a moment. But Rashtar's dark, huge eyes convinced him that she was acting out of naivety. He did not hold children responsible, unlike adults. Rashtar is even more ignorant of the rules of aristocratic society than the children of aristocrats, so he should show some understanding. But even so, Rashtar, did anyone try to stop you when you said you were going to visit the Empress? Cheryl and Kaisu. Who are they? Rashtar's maids. The Emperor appointed them to me. And besides servants, do you have a maid of honor? No. Rashtar tilted her head again. Baron Lant stood up with a determined look. On that note, he returned to Empress Soish and reported his visit to Rasht. Your Majesty, Rashtar is now your concubine, but she knows nothing of aristocratic society. She has maids, but she needs a maid of honor. The second secretary, listening from the sidelines, commented, would a noblewoman want to serve a simple man like Rashtar? Rashtar is not the first commoner to become a concubine. Baron Lant objected to the secretary and turned again to the emperor. You should at least give her a maid of honor to guide her in aristocratic society. That's what I was already thinking. Agreed Soashu, Baron Lunt. Yes, your majesty. Find the maid of honor who will be responsible for helping Rashtar. Yes, your majesty. I was strolling through the garden at the West Palace when I saw a big beautiful bird sitting next to a huge flower, picking its petals. What a strange bird. My maidens did not notice the bird. As they chattered passionately about the futility of the Soashu secretary's efforts to find a maid of honor for Rashtar. I carefully approached her myself. When I reached out my hand, the bird quickly jumped on it. It flapped its wings and pressed its beak against the back of my hand, as if it were accustomed to humans. Was this bird raised by someone of the nobility? I stroked the bird's head and noticed a small piece of paper tied to its leg. I unfolded it and found a note written in small print. I'm a foreign visitor on my way to New Year's Eve. Wrote this after I had a drink. I laughed, and my ladies came over to see what happened. She's nice. What a beautiful bird. What is it called? I know it's a difficult bird to tame, isn't it used for hunting? I showed them the letter, and my maidens began to encourage me to answer it with smiles. I smiled back. Was the note really from a drunken foreigner? Many foreign ambassadors are coming here for the new year, so it's not unusual. The birds usually flew to the bird's pagoda, which emitted a unique scent that attracted them. Is it amazing how this bird flew all the way? I pulled out a small pocket pen, which I always carry with me, and the maid of honor got the paper. The drunken bird flies back. If it finds the right way, it's better than its master. The ladies craned their necks as they watched me write a message back and burst out laughing. I hid the pen, stroked the bird, and tied the note to its leg. The bird pecked its beak in my hand again and flew away. How delightful, I said as I watched her fly. This bird seems to love the Empress. Yes, isn't it surprising that it only goes to the Empress?